Hello, I'm Ben and you're watching The PhD Parent. So this video is one in a series focusing on kids' sleep. In the current video, I'll be discussing daytime sleep, looking at research that's investigated how much sleep kids get during the day, how often they nap, and the age at which kids stop napping. In a different video, I discuss the recommended amount of sleep and the actual amount of sleep that kids tend to get across a 24-hour period. And I have another video in which I discuss kids' nighttime sleep habits. And finally, if your kid is having sleep problems and you want to know more about potential sleep interventions, you can check out my video in which I look at the evidence for common sleep strategies, another video in which I look at the evidence for bedtime routines, and finally a video in which I look at the evidence for graded extinction, otherwise known as sleep training. The links to all those videos are down below. For the moment though, it's on to how much sleep do infants and kids get during the day. Now, if you're wondering, there are no recommendations concerning the amount of sleep that kids should get during the day. The recommendations are only for the amount of sleep that kids should be getting across a 24-hour period. So quite a few studies have examined the daytime sleep habits of infants and kids. When there are a bunch of studies out there, to better understand what these studies tell us, researchers typically will conduct a meta-analysis, which is basically a statistical synthesis of the different findings reported. A well-cited meta-analysis that's examined daytime sleep habits in kids is Galland. However, this meta-analysis has been around a while, so I decided to conduct one of my own. Specifically, I took the studies considered by Galland, though I got rid of some where it wasn't really clear how the data could be used, and then I added extra studies, mostly published post-2012. I didn't go all out in my search for studies, and so I'm sure there are some that I've missed, but my results are nevertheless more up-to-date than Galland. So I ended up with 19 studies for my meta-analysis. As you'll see, for the first 12 months of life, the results are mostly broken into 2-month periods, and then from 1 year of age onwards, the results are broken into 6-month periods up until 3 years of age. And while I included 19 studies, each estimate of daytime sleep was not based upon data from all 19 studies. And this is because some studies looked at kids across different ages, whereas others only looked at kids of a certain age, for example, 6-month-old kids. On average, the estimates I report are based on about 4.5 studies, with the average number of kids in these studies being about 3,500. Now, a couple of things worth mentioning about these studies. First, almost all results are based upon parental reports of sleep. As mentioned in another video, such reports tend to be overestimates of the amount of sleep kids get. That is, when you look at objective measures of sleep, these are typically less than parental reports. Now, one reason for this is that parents may not be aware of when their child has gone to sleep or woken up. For example, if you put your kid down for a nap in a different room and they're drowsy but not asleep, then you're not going to know exactly when they get to sleep. And if they wake up but don't make any noise, then you're not going to know exactly when they've gotten up. Second, when do you reckon daytime starts and ends? Now, this type of definitional issue is common in research. And it's important because if you want to make claims about how much kids sleep during the day, then you have to say when daytime is. Not surprisingly, there's no agreement on this question. Some studies define daytime as 7 AM to 7 PM, others as 8 AM to 7 PM, and others still as 5 AM to 6 PM. Now, this is problematic because you end up with variation across studies in terms of daytime sleep that reflects differences in definition rather than genuine differences in the amount of sleep kids are getting. Anyway, not really my problem. So here are the results of my meta-analysis. First, this is the average number of hours of sleep that kids get during the day. The error bars reflect standard deviation. Now, these averages represent the amount of daytime sleep that a typical kid gets. One issue with averages is that they only provide a snapshot of what's going on with data. One way of getting a more complete picture is to use percentile ranks. These ranks tell you the amount of sleep that you would need to get to be sleeping more than a specified percentage of kids. So I worked out the 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentiles for daytime sleep duration. And here they are. To give a concrete example of how to interpret these percentile ranks, look at kids aged 1 month old. The cutoff for the 10th percentile is about 4 hours, so if a kid is getting this amount of sleep, then they're getting more sleep than 10% of kids. The cutoff for the 90th percentile is about 8 hours, so if a kid is getting this amount of sleep, then they're getting more sleep than 90% of kids. Now, one thing to mention is that I calculated these percentiles using the standard deviation. This approach is only appropriate if daytime sleep is normally distributed. I don't have access to the raw data for each study, but the data reported by Eggleston suggests that it's reasonable to assume that daytime sleep is normally distributed. Another thing to mention is that these percentiles are not diagnostic. That is, if a kid falls in the extremes, upper or lower, that should not be taken as indicating the kid has some issue. It's possible that it flags an issue worth investigating, but that's what we have health professionals for. So now on to how often do infants and kids nap. Now, of course, naps can be sweet relief for parents as they give you a chance to rest yourself or catch up on whatever else you need to do. Now, if you want to know how often kids tend to nap, here it is. So as can be seen, the number of naps kids take gradually reduces as they get older. Unlike the amount of sleep kids get during the day, where I computed percentile ranks, I won't do the same here. The reason for this is that I have to use the standard deviation to do so. Now, this approach requires your data to be normally distributed. Problem is that I have no idea whether the number of naps kids have each day is normally distributed, so no percentile ranks. And one thing this data doesn't tell you is when kids start to go through the day without naps, so that's up next. So the data in this section indicates the percentage of kids who are still napping at a given age. There were not that many studies to draw from, and they only reported data from 6 months onwards. Presumably that's because all kids are napping before this age. So here's what I found. As can be seen, just about every kid is napping up until 18 months of age. Then by 24 months, you start to see a few kids drop off. By 36 months, while the majority are still napping, it's reasonably common for a kid to be no longer napping. And for the same reason as mentioned previously, no percentile ranks. Now, do you want to know more? As mentioned, this video is one in a series focusing on kids' sleep. So I also have a video that looks at the recommended amount of sleep and the actual amount of sleep that kids tend to get across a 24-hour period. And I have a video that looks at nighttime sleeping habits of kids. And lastly, if you want to know about sleep interventions, I have a video that looks at the evidence for common sleep strategies, another video that looks at the evidence for bedtime routines, and finally a video that looks at the evidence for graded extinction, otherwise known as sleep training. And the links to those videos are all down below. For the moment though, that's it for daytime sleep. If there's anything I've gotten wrong, any important research I've overlooked, or if you have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, happy parenting.